Have you ever witnessed an act of human courage awaken something so profound it changed a wild animal forever? When wildlife photographer David Chen risked his life to save a baby gorilla from a massive anaconda's crushing coils, he thought his heroic intervention would end there. But what the silent mother gorilla did next, her response to seeing a human save her child, was so unthinkable, so beyond anything ever documented, that it redefined our understanding of animal consciousness and gratitude.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.
The Sangha Trinational Forest sprawls across the borders of Cameroon, Central African Republic, and Republic of Congo, like a living cathedral, where ancient hardwood trees create canopies so dense that sunlight filters through in golden shafts that seem to illuminate secrets older than human memory. This UNESCO World Heritage Site represents one of Africa's last remaining fragments of pristine rainforest, where lowland gorillas navigate alongside forest elephants through an ecosystem so complex that new species are still being discovered by researchers who venture into its remote depths. Massive buttress roots create natural corridors between towering trees, while hidden rivers wind through the forest floor, creating a network of waterways where some of the world's most dangerous predators lurk beneath deceptively calm surfaces. The unique geography of Sangha creates rare encounters where mountain-dwelling primates must cross snake-infested streams to reach seasonal feeding grounds, forcing interactions that challenge every assumption about territorial boundaries and survival strategies. This isn't your typical conservation story about wildlife photography or scientific research in remote locations. What you're about to witness transcends every assumption about gratitude, recognition, and the capacity for consciousness that exists within our closest evolutionary relatives. It's not about documenting animal behavior or capturing the perfect shot. It's about the unthinkable moment when an act of human compassion triggers a response so profound, so beyond anything ever recorded in primatology, that it challenges our understanding of what separates human emotion from animal consciousness. The forest's dense canopy creates a world where silence reigns supreme, where communication happens through subtle gestures, and where the slightest sound can mean the difference between life and death. Here, in this cathedral of green, where every shadow could hide either salvation or destruction, encounters between species operate by rules that have evolved over millions of years. On this particular morning, as mist rose from the warm forest floor and filtered sunlight painted the ancient trees in shades of emerald and gold, destiny was preparing to showcase an interaction so extraordinary that it would forever change how we perceive the emotional depths of our closest living relatives in the animal kingdom. David Chen had dedicated the last decade of his life to documenting the complex social behaviors of Central Africa's lowland gorillas, his camera lens capturing moments of tenderness and intelligence that challenged every assumption about the emotional capacity of our evolutionary cousins. The 42-year-old wildlife photographer possessed an unusual combination of technical expertise and intuitive understanding that had earned him international recognition for images revealing the hidden depths of primate consciousness. David's weathered hands bore the calluses of countless hours spent maneuvering heavy equipment through challenging terrain, while his patient brown eyes reflected the kind of deep respect for wildlife that came from years of intimate observation. His ability to remain motionless for hours, reading the subtle communications that form the basis of gorilla society, had earned him acceptance among several family groups who recognized him as a benign presence in their forest domain. What made David extraordinary wasn't just his photographic skill, but his documented ability to interpret gorilla emotional states with scientific accuracy that bordered on telepathic connection. His field notes contained observations that had contributed crucial insights to primate research, particularly regarding the complexity of maternal bonds and family dynamics among these gentle giants. In the heart of Sangha's densest vegetation lived Maki, a 25-year-old female lowland gorilla whose intelligence and emotional depth had made her legendary among the researchers who studied her family group. Her massive frame, weighing nearly 200 pounds, moved with surprising grace through the forest canopy, while her dark eyes held depths of wisdom that spoke to years of successfully raising offspring in one of the world's most challenging environments. Maki's most precious charge was little Django, her 8-month-old son, whose playful curiosity and fearless nature brought joy to the entire family group, while creating constant anxiety for his protective mother. The young gorilla's golden brown fur and bright eyes sparkled with the kind of innocent wonder that made him beloved by every researcher who had observed his development, though his tendency to explore beyond safe boundaries often led him into situations that tested his family's protective capabilities.
The first warning came as a subtle shift in the forest's ancient rhythm that David's trained senses detected through his camera viewfinder while documenting Maki's family group during their morning foraging activities. The familiar symphony of rainforest sounds, the melodic calls of various bird species, the constant chatter of smaller primates, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the humid breeze began to fragment in a pattern he had learned to associate with the movement of large predators through the dense vegetation. David slowly lowered his telephoto lens, his photographer's instincts immediately recognizing the environmental cues that preceded dangerous encounters in the wild. The sudden silence spreading through the canopy spoke to threats that demanded immediate attention and heightened awareness. His years of documenting wildlife behavior had taught him to read these subtle atmospheric changes as clearly as written warnings. The gorilla family showed their own acute awareness of the growing tension, their relaxed feeding behavior shifting to the hyper-vigilant alertness that came from generations of avoiding forest predators. Maki's soft, grunting calls carried warning notes that made every member of her group immediately scan the surrounding vegetation for signs of danger they couldn't yet identify but instinctively recognized as approaching. Meanwhile, little Jingo's innocent exploration had led him away from the protective oversight of his family group toward the dense undergrowth near a hidden stream where the forest's canopy created perfect shadows for predators that preferred ambush tactics. The young gorilla's fascination with a cluster of colorful butterflies had drawn him beyond the invisible safety perimeter that his mother's experience had taught her to maintain. From his concealed observation position, David caught glimpses of movement in the streamside vegetation that made his blood run cold. His professional eye, trained to spot wildlife through dense cover, detected the unmistakable patterns of something massive moving through the water with predatory intent. Something that didn't belong in the elevated forest zones where gorillas felt secure during their daily activities. The convergence was inevitable and terrifying, as little Jingo's playful pursuit of the butterflies was carrying him directly into the path of one of Central Africa's most formidable aquatic predators.
What erupted from the hidden stream was a nightmare of coiled muscle and predatory power that transformed David's peaceful morning documentation into a life-and-death crisis. The massive green anaconda that emerged from the water was easily 35 feet of pure serpentine muscle, its olive-colored scales glistening with moisture as it moved with the fluid precision that made these creatures legendary among the world's most formidable constrictors. The attack unfolded with devastating speed that demonstrated millions of years of evolutionary perfection in ambush predation. Little Django, caught completely off guard while reaching for a particularly brilliant butterfly, had no time to react before powerful coils wrapped around his small form with the inexorable force of a living vice.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The young gorilla's scream of terror pierced the forest air, a sound so heartbreaking it seemed to shatter the very soul of the ancient woodland. The anaconda's strategy revealed the intelligence that made these serpents among the Amazon's most feared predators, now somehow present in Central African waterways through mechanisms that challenged biogeographical understanding. Instead of attempting to drag Django into deeper water where drowning would occur quickly, the massive snake positioned itself in the stream's shallows where the struggle would be visible while making rescue attempts exponentially more dangerous for any potential interveners. Each of Django's desperate movements only seemed to trigger the anaconda's tightening response, the massive coils contracting with methodical precision designed to crush bones and restrict breathing without damaging the prey's flesh. The young gorilla's small hands grasped frantically at the smooth scales, finding no purchase against the relentless pressure that was systematically eliminating his ability to breathe or call for help. From his observation position, David watched in horror as the gentle creature he had grown to love during months of documentation was methodically crushed by one of nature's most efficient killers. The anaconda's cold intelligence was evident in every movement. This wasn't random predation, but a calculated execution by an apex predator that had somehow found its way into an ecosystem where its presence defied natural law, creating a crisis that would test every bond between human observer and animal subject.
David's response to witnessing little Django's mortal peril revealed the profound internal battle between professional objectivity and human compassion that defined every wildlife photographer's most challenging moments. Every protocol he had ever learned screamed that intervention in natural predator-prey interactions was forbidden, potentially disrupting ecosystems and exposing human observers to deadly danger. Yet, as he watched the young gorilla, who had become like family, being systematically crushed to death, something deeper than scientific detachment began to override his training. The photographer's hands trembled as he set down his expensive equipment, his mind racing through calculations of distance, terrain difficulty, and the terrifying reality that approaching a 35-foot anaconda would likely result in his own death alongside Django's. His years of studying animal behavior had created emotional bonds with his subjects that transcended professional boundaries, making this crisis feel intensely personal rather than merely documentary. Meanwhile, Maki's response to her offspring's terror was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the entire tragedy. The mother gorilla had detected Django's distress immediately, her powerful frame moving toward the stream with desperate speed. But upon seeing the massive anaconda wrapped around her baby, something extraordinary occurred that challenged every assumption about gorilla emotional expression under extreme stress. Instead of the frantic vocalizations and aggressive displays that researchers expected from maternal primates facing family crises, Maki became completely silent. Her massive form froze at the edge of the stream, her dark eyes fixed on the terrible scene with an intensity that spoke to profound internal calculation rather than panic. This unnatural stillness was more disturbing than any screaming would have been, suggesting depths of emotional processing that went far beyond typical animal responses. Other members of the gorilla family showed their own distress through soft hooting calls and anxious pacing, but they seemed to take behavioral cues from Maki's unprecedented silence. The absence of her voice created an eerie quiet that amplified Django's weakening cries, making his approaching death seem even more tragic against the backdrop of his mother's incomprehensible stillness. David realized that he was witnessing something that challenged
fundamental assumptions about maternal behavior in extreme circumstances. David's decision to intervene came not from heroic impulse, but from something far more primal, the recognition that he could not survive psychologically if he allowed this gentle creature to die while he possessed the potential power to prevent it. The photographer abandoned his expensive equipment without a second thought, his movements driven by desperate urgency as he began his treacherous approach toward the Anaconda's killing zone. What made David's strategy extraordinary was his apparent understanding of the tactical challenge he faced, developed through years of observing predator-prey interactions through his telephoto lens. Instead of the direct assault that might trigger the serpent's most violent defensive responses, he moved through the forest undergrowth with the stealth he had learned from documenting elusive wildlife, each step calculated to maintain the element of surprise until the critical moment of intervention. His improvised weapon, a sturdy branch nearly 6 feet in length, felt pathetically inadequate against a predator of such massive proportions. But David's experience photographing anaconda behavior in other locations had taught him about the specific vulnerability points where human intervention might prove effective. His approach revealed tactical thinking that went far beyond amateur heroics into something approaching professional understanding of reptilian anatomy. But David's desperate rescue attempt had not gone unnoticed by the observer whose reaction would soon prove most significant. Maki's unnatural silence hadn't indicated paralysis or abandonment. It had marked a form of intense concentration that suggested cognitive processes far beyond typical maternal response to crisis. Her dark eyes tracked David's approach with an analytical precision that spoke to intelligence assessment rather than emotional overwhelm. What was most remarkable about the mother gorilla's behavior was the way she positioned herself relative to the unfolding rescue attempt. Instead of the interference that might be expected from a panicked parent, Maki moved to create clear sight lines that would allow her to observe every detail of the human's intervention. Her silence seemed designed to eliminate acoustic distractions that might complicate David's approach, suggesting understanding of cooperative strategy that challenged fundamental assumptions about interspecies recognition and tactical awareness. David's assault on the anaconda was a desperate gamble that transformed his decade of wildlife observation into direct participation in the most dangerous encounter of his career. His initial strike with the improvised club connected with the serpent's massive head with a sound that echoed through the forest like a gunshot, the impact sending shockwaves through both combatants as David committed himself to a confrontation that would either save Django's life or claim his own in the attempt. The anaconda's reaction was immediate and terrifying, the massive serpent's head whipping around to assess this unprecedented threat that had materialized from the forest shadows. But David had anticipated this defensive response, using his momentum to execute a second strike at the precise point behind the snake's skull where neural control could be disrupted. His years of studying reptilian behavior through his camera lens now served him in the most unlikely application imaginable. What followed was the most extraordinary display of human determination ever witnessed by the gorilla family. David's battle strategy revealed deep understanding of anaconda anatomy that went far beyond theoretical knowledge into practical application under extreme pressure. His strikes were precisely targeted at pressure points where he could disrupt the serpent's constricting ability without triggering its most dangerous defensive responses. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this intervention was Maki's behavior throughout the entire rescue attempt. The mother gorilla maintained her unnatural silence while positioning herself in ways that seemed designed to provide tactical support without physical interference. Her movements suggested understanding that her presence might complicate David's rescue efforts. Yet her intense observation indicated she was cataloging every detail of his technique. The critical moment arrived when David managed to apply enough pressure to the anaconda's neural control centers to disrupt its crushing grip on little Django. The serpent's coils loosened just enough for the young gorilla to draw his first full breath in several terrifying minutes, his weak cries of relief seeming to galvanize David's remaining strength for the final phase of this impossible rescue. As the anaconda began its retreat toward deeper water, recognizing that this hunt had become too costly to continue, the stage was set for Maki's unthinkable response.
The rescue's success depended on a final coordinated effort that would test every assumption about interspecies cooperation under extreme circumstances. As David managed to create enough disruption in the anaconda's grip for little Django to breathe, the exhausted photographer found himself facing the serpent's full defensive fury as the massive predator attempted to secure both human and gorilla in its crushing embrace. It was in this moment of apparent defeat that something absolutely unthinkable occurred. Maki's silence suddenly shattered as she made a decision that challenged every documented pattern of maternal gorilla behavior. The powerful female didn't charge wildly toward the anaconda as expected. Instead, she executed a calculated intervention that revealed tactical intelligence bordering on the miraculous. Moving with surprising stealth for a creature of her massive size, Maki positioned herself behind the anaconda's head while David maintained his frontal assault. Her approach was so precisely timed and coordinated with the human's efforts that it seemed to represent conscious strategy rather than instinctual response. The mother gorilla's massive hands found purchase on the serpent's neck with surgical precision, applying pressure to neural control points that complemented David's attacks. What happened next defied every law of natural behavior ever documented in wildlife research. Human and gorilla worked together in perfect synchronization, their combined assault creating a coordinated strategy that the anaconda's evolutionary experience had never prepared it to counter. David's strikes disrupted the snake's sensory control, while Maki's powerful grip eliminated its ability to reposition for effective defense. The anaconda, faced with this unprecedented alliance between natural enemies, found its survival instincts finally recognizing when retreat offered better odds than persistence. The massive serpent released its remaining grip on little Django and began sliding toward the deeper sections of the stream, recognizing that this hunt had evolved into something far beyond its capabilities. As the last coils disappeared beneath the water's surface, David and Maki found themselves staring at each other across species boundaries that had just been shattered by shared purpose. Little Django's weak movements between them provided living proof that cooperation could transcend every barrier that evolution had created between human and animal consciousness.
The immediate aftermath of Django's rescue created a scene that challenged every protocol in wildlife observation ethics and redefined the relationship between human researcher and animal subject. As David knelt beside the exhausted young gorilla, checking for injuries while his own hands trembled from adrenaline, Matafi approached with movements so deliberate they seemed to carry ceremonial significance. What happened next was perhaps the most unthinkable moment in the history of human-gorilla interaction. Instead of reclaiming her rescued offspring and withdrawing to safety, Mataki extended one massive hand toward David in what could only be interpreted as a gesture of formal recognition. When her knuckles made contact with his shoulder, the touch carried emotional frequencies that seemed to communicate directly from consciousness to consciousness, transcending every barrier that language and species had created. But Mataki's unthinkable response went far beyond simple gratitude. The mother gorilla began a series of soft vocalizations that David's years of research had never documented, sounds that seemed designed specifically to communicate with him rather than her own species. Her approach to little Django was equally unprecedented as she positioned herself to include David within the protective circle typically reserved for family members.
The young gorilla's recovery was aided by both maternal care and continued human presence, as Mataki made no attempt to exclude David from the healing process. Her behavior suggested recognition that this human had become part of her family's story in ways that transcended temporary assistance, creating bonds that challenged fundamental assumptions about territorial behavior and species loyalty. Over the following hours, as David documented this extraordinary encounter with equipment retrieved from his abandoned position, Mataki's interactions revealed depths of emotional intelligence that bordered on the miraculous. Her apparent understanding that David's intervention had saved her child seemed to have awakened recognition capabilities that redefined the boundaries between human and animal consciousness. The silent mother's unthinkable response had become a testament to the universal language of gratitude and the profound connections that could emerge when courage bridged the gaps that evolution had created between species.
The story of David's heroic intervention and Maki's unthinkable response became a cornerstone in primatology research, fundamentally challenging every assumption about the emotional capacity and recognition abilities of our closest evolutionary relatives. His footage from that extraordinary day provided unprecedented documentation of interspecies cooperation and gratitude that rewrote textbooks on animal consciousness and communication. The most profound impact wasn't on academic circles, but on conservation philosophy worldwide. The incident proved that recognition of heroism, understanding of sacrifice, and the capacity for gratitude existed far beyond the boundaries that science had traditionally drawn around different species. Maki's coordinated assistance during the rescue demonstrated tactical intelligence that suggested consciousness depths rivaling human cognition. Wildlife research centers began incorporating new protocols based on the Sangha model, recognizing that animals possessed emotional intelligence sophisticated enough to form lasting bonds with humans who demonstrated courage on their behalf. The mother gorilla's ability to distinguish between threat and protection, enemy and ally, revealed cognitive capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about primate psychology. Most remarkably, the relationship between David and Maki's family continued long after that fateful day. The photographer's subsequent visits to Sangha were marked by recognition behaviors that suggested the gorillas retained detailed memories of his heroic intervention. Maki would often approach David with the same ceremonial deliberation she had shown immediately after Django's rescue, her interactions indicating that their bond had become permanent. Little Django grew into a strong young gorilla whose early brush with death seemed to have created lasting connections between human and gorilla consciousness. Their story reminded the world that courage, recognition, and gratitude are universal languages that transcend every boundary evolution has created. In the cathedral forests of Sangha, where impossible alliances formed in moments of crisis, their legacy continues to inspire new understanding of what it means to be conscious, compassionate beings sharing this extraordinary world. Maki's unthinkable response proved that the capacity for love, sacrifice, and recognition of nobility exists wherever consciousness takes root in the magnificent tapestry of life.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.